"Get out of here, you filthy beggar! You're ruining the view of the skyscraper." A heavy boot kicked dirt onto my tattered clothes. I didn't make a sound. I couldn't. I just pulled my hood lower to hide my face. The security guard didn't know that the giant glass building behind him belonged to me. He didn't know that just a month ago I was Sarah Vale, the CEO of Vale Freight Group. Back then, I controlled the ships that moved across the entire ocean. Now, I was just a ghost in a dirty coat, hiding in the shadows of my own empire. The guard laughed as a black limo pulled up. Out stepped Alaric Crown, the man I once called my husband. He looked perfect in his $1,000 suit, smiling at the cameras. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by cold hands. I remembered the taste of the bitter poison he slipped into my wine. I remembered the terrifying feeling of the wind rushing past my ears as he pushed me off the roof of our penthouse. He thought I was dead. He thought he had stolen my billions and my life. He didn't know I was standing right there, watching him. I had lost my voice, but I hadn't lost my mind. Just as the guard raised his hand to strike me again, a man in a simple work uniform stepped forward and grabbed his arm. It was Cassian. He didn't look like much, but his eyes were steady and kind. "Leave her alone," he said firmly. He looked at me and offered a hand. He didn't see a beggar, he saw a person. I took his hand, and for the first time since my world crashed down, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Alaric thought he won, but he made one big mistake. He let me live. And with Cassian by my side, I was going to make Alaric regret every single thing he did to me. I stood on the sidewalk, my feet bare and my heart heavy. Rain began to fall, mixing with the dirt on my face. Above me, the massive glass towers of the city reached for the clouds, glowing with gold and blue lights. One of those towers belonged to me, or at least it used to. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in scratches and grease. Just a few weeks ago, these same hands wore diamond rings and signed deals worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. I was Sarah Vale, the CEO of Vale Freight Group. People used to bow when I walked into a room. Now, they didn't even see me as a human being. A black car splashed through a puddle, soaking my tattered coat. I didn't move. I couldn't scream. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. That was the gift my husband Alaric Crown left me with. I remembered that night perfectly. It played in my head like a horror movie that never ended. We were in our penthouse suite. The view of the ocean was beautiful, and the city lights looked like fallen stars. Alaric had poured me a glass of expensive red wine. He looked so handsome, smiling at me with those eyes I thought I could trust. "To our future, Sarah," he had said. His voice was smooth like silk. I took a sip. Almost immediately my chest felt tight. My throat began to burn, and my vision blurred. I tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. I dropped the glass and it shattered on the white marble floor. Alaric didn't reach out to help me. He just stood there, watching me struggle for air. The smile stayed on his face, but it wasn't a loving smile anymore. It was cold. It was the smile of a predator. "You know, Sarah," he whispered, leaning down so his breath was hot against my ear. "You're just too good at business. You built an empire, but you forgot one thing. You forgot to see who was standing right next to you." He grabbed my arm. I was so weak I couldn't fight back. He dragged me toward the floor-to-ceiling window. With a remote in his pocket, he slid the glass open. The cold night air rushed in. "Honey, once you're dead, Vale Freight Group's billions will all be mine alone," he said. Then he pushed. The feeling of falling is something you never forget. The stomach-flipping terror, the wind whistling past your ears, the way the ground rushes up to meet you. I hit a lower balcony, then tumbled into a massive pile of trash bags in the alleyway below. The bags saved my life, but the poison and the trauma did their work. My voice was gone. I stayed in that alley for days, hiding behind dumpsters. I watched the news on a discarded tablet. Alaric was on every channel, crying fake tears. He told the world I had slipped or disappeared in a tragic accident. He was already moving into my office. He was already calling himself the boss. I knew if I went back now, he would just finish the job. He had the money, the police, and the lawyers on his side. I was a ghost. I had to stay a ghost until I was strong enough to haunt him. That's how I ended up here, standing in front of a small glowing sign that read, "Ren's Diner." My stomach growled so loudly it hurt. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I pushed the door open. A bell jingled. The air inside smelled like fried onions and coffee. It felt warm and safe, the complete opposite of the cold world outside. "What do you want?" a sharp voice barked. I looked up. A woman with heavy makeup and a sour face stood behind the counter. This was Drusilla Renford. She looked at my dirty clothes and wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something rotten. "We don't give handouts here, you stinking beggar," she yelled. "Get out before I call the cops. You're going to scare away the real customers." I opened my mouth to tell her I could pay, that I had a secret bank account no one knew about, but no words came. I just pointed to my throat and shook my head. "A mute too? Great," Drusilla rolled her eyes. "I don't care if you can't talk. I can see you're a loser. Out! Now!" She grabbed a broom and started swinging it toward my feet. I backed away, feeling the familiar sting of tears in my eyes. I was the woman who managed 1,000 ships, yet I was being chased away by a lady with a broom. "Stop it, Drusilla." A man walked out of the kitchen. He was tall, with broad shoulders and messy dark hair. He wore a simple gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hands were calloused, like he spent his days fixing things. This was Cassian. He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't see disgust in someone's eyes. He looked at me with genuine concern. "She's cold, and she's hungry," Cassian said quietly. His voice was deep and steady. "We aren't going to throw her out into the rain." "Cassian, you're an idiot," Drusilla snapped. "Your father is in the hospital, we have bills to pay, and you want to feed a stray? She's a vagrant. She probably has fleas." Cassian didn't argue. He just walked over to a table and pulled out a chair. He looked at me and gestured for me to sit. "I'm Cassian," he said. "I can see you've had a hard time. If you can help me clean up around here and help in the shop, I can give you a place to stay and 3 meals a day. We need a handyman. Well, a handy person, and I think you've got a strong spirit." I looked at him, stunned. He was offering me a lifeline. He didn't know I was a billionaire. He didn't know I was a genius. He just saw someone who needed help. I nodded quickly, my eyes blurring with tears. I grabbed a napkin and a pen from the table and wrote 2 words, "Thank you." "She's staying in the back room," Cassian told Drusilla, who was huffing and puffing. "And she's going to be my wife." My heart nearly stopped. "Wife?" Cassian looked at me and lowered his voice, so only I could hear. "The police have been sniffing around for unidentified people in this area. If we tell them you're my wife, they won't ask questions. It's just a contract to keep you safe. You don't have to be a real wife, but you'll have a name and a home. Do you agree?" I realized what he was doing. He was protecting me. In this world, a woman with no name was easy to hurt. A woman who belonged to someone was harder to touch. I looked at his honest face. Then I looked at the rain outside, thinking of Alaric sitting in my gold chair. To get my revenge, I had to survive. To survive, I needed a shield. I picked up the pen and wrote, "I agree." Cassian smiled. It wasn't a cold smile like Alaric's, it was warm. "Welcome home, Sarah." As I sat there eating a bowl of warm soup, I watched Alaric on the small TV hanging in the corner of the diner. He was giving an interview about expanding the Vale legacy. He looked so proud of himself. "Enjoy it while you can, Alaric," I thought as I gripped my spoon. "You threw me into the trash, but you didn't realize I'm the one who knows where all the bodies are buried. I'm going to take everything from you. 1 ship, $1, and 1 heartbeat at a time." The beggar he created was about to become his worst nightmare. I was no longer Sarah Vale, the victim. I was the silent wife of a handyman, and I was going to burn his kingdom to the ground. I sat on the edge of the small wooden cot in the back room of the diner. The air was thick with the smell of old grease and floor cleaner, but to me it felt like the most luxurious suite in the city. It was a place where Alaric's assassins couldn't find me. The wedding had been nothing more than a few signed papers and a quick trip to a local office. I was now legally Sarah Wren. It was a strange name, one that felt like a heavy coat I wasn't used to wearing. Cassian had been quiet and respectful the whole time. He didn't ask about my past, and he didn't push me to speak. He just handed me a key and told me that as long as I worked hard, I would have a home. But the peace didn't last long. The next morning, the door to my room flew open with a bang. "Get up, you lazy bum!" Drusilla screamed. She was wearing a bright floral apron that didn't match her angry face. "Just because you tricked my stepson into marrying you?" doesn't mean you get to live here for free. The floors aren't going to scrub themselves. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing. I wanted to tell her that I could buy her entire diner and turn it into a parking lot without blinking. But I remained silent. I grabbed the bucket and the mop she shoved toward me. As I scrubbed the checkered tiles of the diner, I watched the morning news on the TV. Alaric was giving a speech at the Vale Freight Group headquarters. He looked so proud, standing in front of my logo. "We are moving toward a new era of dominance," Alaric told the reporters. "My late wife Sarah would have wanted us to take bigger risks. That is why I'm announcing a massive investment in the southern suburbs." I almost dropped my mop. The southern suburbs? That area was a swamp. It was a money pit. I had done the research months ago. If he put the company's liquidity there, he would lose everything. Then it hit me. Alaric wasn't a businessman. He was a thief. He didn't understand the market. He only understood how to spend money that wasn't his. "Go ahead, Alaric," I thought, a cold smile forming on my lips. "Dig your own grave. I'll be there to throw the dirt in." "Hey, stop daydreaming and get to work," Drusilla barked, kicking my bucket. Soapy water splashed over my shoes. "And when you're done here, you're going to help Blythe with the deliveries. We have a big order for a construction site nearby." Blythe Wren, Cassian's younger sibling, walked in. Unlike Drusilla, Blythe looked at me with a bit of pity. "Take it easy on her, Mom. She's doing her best." "Her best isn't good enough," Drusilla grumbled. "She's a mute beggar. We're doing her a favor just letting her breathe our air." Blythe sighed and beckoned for me to follow. We loaded up an old, beat-up van with crates of sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. As we drove through the city, I looked out the window. Every time I saw a Vale freight truck, my blood boiled. Those were my trucks. Those drivers worked for me. We arrived at a large construction site. The workers were busy, and the foreman was yelling at a man who looked stressed out. "I don't care about the delays," the foreman shouted. "If those steel beams aren't here by tomorrow, this whole project is dead." I peeked at the documents on the foreman's clipboard. I recognized the project. It was the Northgate Holdings development. They were one of my biggest clients. If they were having shipping delays, it meant Alaric was already messing up the logistics of Vale Freight. He was failing to meet deadlines. I pulled a small notepad from my pocket. I wrote a quick note and handed it to the stressed-out man when the foreman turned away. "Check Seaborn Trading Co. for the beams. They have a surplus in the harbor." The man looked at the note, then at me. "Who are you? How do you know about Seaborn?" I just tapped my lips and pointed to the crates of food. I didn't wait for him to respond. I had already sent a secret message to Ronan, my loyal ally, the night before. I had told him to use the secret funds from my offshore account to buy up every scrap of structural steel in the harbor under the name Seaborn Trading Co. If Alaric couldn't deliver, I would. I would steal my own clients right out from under his nose. When we got back to the diner, Cassian was there. He was fixing a broken toaster at the counter. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Rough day?" he asked. I nodded and wiped the sweat from my forehead. "I have something for you," he whispered. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small, second-hand smartphone. It was old, and the screen was cracked, but it worked. "I know you can't talk, but maybe this will help you communicate." I got it from a pawn shop down the street. I stared at the phone. It was exactly what I needed. With this, I could access my encrypted accounts. I could manage my shadow empire from this greasy little diner. I looked at Cassian, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. He was a simple man, but he was the only person who had ever given me a tool to find my voice again. "Thank you," I mouthed. That night, while the rest of the house was asleep, I sat in my dark room. The light from the cracked phone screen glowed on my face. I logged into my private server. "Ronan, are you there? Boss? Is that really you? We thought you were dead. Alaric is telling everyone you passed away in your sleep. I'm alive, and I'm angry. Did you get the steel?" "Yes, every ton in the city. Northgate Holdings just called me. They're desperate." "Sell it to them. But don't use my name. Everything goes through Seaborn. And Ronan? Start shorting Vale Freight stocks. I want the price to drop until it hits the floor." I clicked send and leaned back against the hard wall. In the next room, I heard Drusilla yelling at Cassian about money. She didn't realize that the beggar in the back room was currently moving millions of dollars across the globe. The battle had started. Alaric had the fancy office and the cameras, but I had the intelligence and the silence. He thought he threw me out to die, but he actually gave me the perfect place to hide while I sharpened my blade. I looked at the simple wedding band on my finger. It wasn't gold and it didn't have a diamond, but it felt a lot heavier than the one Alaric gave me. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the city. Tomorrow, I would scrub the floors again. Tomorrow, I would take another $1 from Alaric's pocket. By the time I was done, he wouldn't even have enough money left to buy a sandwich from this diner. The sun had barely begun to peek over the city skyline when Drusilla's loud voice woke me up again. I didn't mind. I was already awake, staring at the cracked screen of my phone. The news was delicious. Vale Freight Group stock had dropped by 3% overnight because of the delays at the Northgate construction site. Alaric was losing money, and he didn't even know why. I tucked the phone into my pocket and walked out into the diner. I spent the morning scrubbing tables and pouring coffee for construction workers. My hands felt rough and smelled like soap, but my mind was busy calculating international shipping routes. Around noon, a black car, not as fancy as a limo, but still expensive, pulled up outside. A man in a sharp suit walked in. He looked out of place among the truckers and workers. It was Dorian Ashford, a billionaire businessman I used to deal with. He looked frustrated. "Is the owner here?" Dorian asked, wiping the dust off his chair with a handkerchief. Drusilla practically ran over to him, her face twisting into a fake giant smile. "I'm the owner's wife. How can I help a handsome gentleman like you?" "I'm looking for the person who sent a tip to the Northgate foreman," Dorian said. "Someone told them to contact Seabourn Trading Co. for steel. Because of that tip, my project was saved. I want to reward whoever helped us." Drusilla's eyes turned into $signs. "Oh, that must have been, me, or maybe my son. We help people all the time." I stood in the corner, holding a dirty rag. I looked at Dorian. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just a nameless girl in a stained apron. I felt a pang of sadness, but I pushed it away. This was my camouflage. "Are you sure?" Dorian asked, looking skeptical. The note was written by someone who knows deep details about harbor logistics. "Definitely us," Drusilla chirped. Suddenly, Cassian walked in from the back. He was carrying a heavy crate of potatoes. He stopped when he saw Dorian. For a second, something strange happened. The two men locked eyes. Dorian's confident look wavered, and he actually took a half step back, as if he was intimidated by the guy who worked in a diner. "Can I help you?" Cassian asked. His voice was calm, but it had a strange power to it. I was just leaving," Dorian said, suddenly looking nervous. He didn't even mention the reward again. He turned and hurried out of the diner. I watched him go, then looked at Cassian. Why would a billionaire like Dorian Ashford be afraid of a handyman? Later that night, I went into the kitchen to get some water. I heard Cassian talking on the phone in the alleyway. I crept toward the back door and listened. "I told you not to come to the diner, Ronan," Cassian said. Wait, he was talking to Ronan? My Ronan? No, it couldn't be. "I don't care about the profit," Cassian continued. "Just make sure the Renhold Consortium keeps a close eye on the Vale Freight Group. If Alaric Crown makes a move, I want to know about it before he even finishes his thought." My heart hammered against my ribs. Cassian wasn't just a handyman. He was the head of the Renhold Consortium, the biggest rival to my own company. He was a secret billionaire, just like I was a secret CEO. I leaned closer, but I tripped over a mop bucket. Clang! The back door flew open. Cassian stood there, his phone already hidden in his pocket. He looked at me, and for a second, his eyes were cold and sharp like a wolf's. But then he softened. He reached out and helped me up. "You should be in bed, Sarah," he said gently. "It's been a long day." I nodded, my heart still racing. I walked back to my room, my mind spinning. We were two ghosts living under the same roof, both hiding empires behind masks of poverty. I pulled out my phone and messaged Ronan. "Ronan, who else is investigating Alaric?" And he responded. "There's a ghost company called Renhold making moves, boss. They're buying up Alaric's debt. Whoever's running it is a genius. They're boxing him in." I looked at the wall separating my room from Cassian's. He wasn't just my protector. He was my partner in a war he didn't even know I was fighting. The next morning, The air in the diner felt different. Every time Cassian moved, I found myself watching him. I watched how he lifted heavy crates like they were feathers. I watched how he looked at the diner's old plumbing with the same focused intensity I used to use when looking at global trade maps. Now that I knew he was the head of the Renhold Consortium, everything made sense. The way Dorian Ashford had trembled, the way Cassian carried himself. He wasn't a handyman trying to act like a boss. He was a boss pretending to be a handyman. But why? Why was a man with billions of dollars scrubbing grease in a tiny diner? "Sarah, are you okay?" Cassian asked. He was standing by the coffee machine, his eyes curious. "You've been staring at that mop for 10 minutes. I jumped and quickly started scrubbing. I grabbed my phone and typed, "Just thinking about work." Cassian walked over and leaned against the counter. "You're a hard worker. Too hard. Most people in your position would have given up. But you? You have fire in your eyes." I looked up at him. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say, "I'm Sarah Vale and I'm going to destroy the man who tried to kill me." But I couldn't risk it. Not yet. Instead, I just smiled and nodded. "I have to go out for a few hours," Cassian said, checking his watch. It was a cheap plastic watch, but I noticed he looked at it like it was a Patek Philippe. "Blythe will be here if you need anything. Don't let Drusilla work you too hard." As soon as his beat-up truck pulled out of the alley, I dropped the mop. I had work to do. I went to my room and pulled out the cracked phone. I called Ronan. "Boss, the plan is working." Ronan's voice crackled with excitement. "Alaric is panicking. He's trying to secure a loan from the Northgate Holdings Group to cover his losses in the South, but they're ignoring his calls." "Good," I typed into the text-to-speech app. "Now, I want you to set up a meeting with the board of directors at Northgate. Tell them Seaborn Trading Co. is ready to sign a long-term exclusivity deal. But there is one condition." "What's the condition?" "They must publicly announce that they are cutting all ties with Vale Freight Group due to instability in leadership. That will tank the stock, Sarah. Alaric will lose millions in a single afternoon." "That's the point, Ronan. I want him to feel the ground shaking." While I was finishing the call, I heard the diner door jingle. I peeked through the curtain. It wasn't a customer. It was a woman dressed in a very expensive, very tight red dress. She looked like she belonged on a runway, not a greasy diner. It was Vesper Langley. I recognized her immediately. She was a headhunter, a recruiter for big corporations, but she was known for being a snake. She worked for whoever paid her the most. "Is the man of the house here?" Vesper asked, fanning herself with a manicured hand. Drusilla came running out, practically bowing. "He's out, but I'm his mother. Are you here to offer him a job? He's very good with his hands." Vesper smirked. "I'm here to offer him a position at Northgate Holdings. We've heard rumors about his talents. My client is willing to pay a very high price to bring him onto their board." I froze behind the curtain. Why was Vesper Langley trying to recruit Cassian? Did she know who he really was? Or was she trying to lure him away because he was a threat to her real boss, Alaric? "A board member?" Drusilla gasped. "My Cassian? He just fixes toasters." "He's much more than that," Vesper said, her eyes scanning the room. They landed on the curtain where I was hiding. I pulled back quickly. "Tell him Vesper called. Tell him the offer won't stay on the table forever." She left a gold-embossed business card on the counter and walked out. Drusilla grabbed the card and started dancing around the room. "We're going to be rich," she cackled. "I knew that boy was good for something. I'll make him take the job, and then I'll kick that mute beggar out for good." I felt a cold shiver. If Cassian took a job at Northgate, he would be working right in the middle of the corporate war I was starting. A few hours later, Cassian returned. He looked tired. Drusilla cornered him immediately, waving the gold card in his face. "Look at this. A real job, with real money. You can stop acting like a servant and start bringing home the millions we deserve." Cassian took the card. He didn't look excited, he looked annoyed. He glanced toward my room, and for a split second our eyes met through the crack in the door. He looked like he wanted to explain something to me. He walked into the kitchen and threw the card into the trash can. "I'm not going anywhere, Drusilla," he said firmly. "I have everything I need right here." My heart did a little flip. Was I part of what he needed? That night, I received a message from Ronan. Ronan, boss, something weird is happening. Someone just bought 10% of Vale Freight's debt. It wasn't us. It was an anonymous buyer through the Renhold Consortium. I looked at the phone, then at the door to Cassian's room. He was buying my company's debt. He was holding the leash that was currently around Alaric's neck. I realized then that we were both playing the same game. We were both circling Alaric like sharks. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Ronan. Sarah, don't fight Renhold. If they want the debt, let them have it. In fact, help them. I want Alaric surrounded on all sides. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. I was a beggar and he was a handyman, but together, we were the most powerful couple in the city. And Alaric Crown had no idea that the two people he looked down on the most were about to turn his world into ashes. The morning air was cold, but the news coming through my cracked phone screen was colder. I stared at the headline on the business site. Vale Freight Group announces memorial service for late CEO Sarah Vale. Alaric was doing it. He was officially declaring me dead to the world. By holding a funeral, he could trigger the death clauses in my contracts, allowing him to bypass the final security locks on my personal billions. He wasn't just burying my body, he was burying my legal existence. Sarah, stop staring at that junk and get out here. Drusilla's voice pierced through the wall. The diner is packed and the trash is overflowing. I tucked the phone away and walked out. The diner was indeed full, but not with our usual construction workers. A group of men in dark suits were sitting at a center table, whispering. I recognized one of them, Thaddeus Rook, the finance lead for my own company. He was the one who handled the share donation process. If he was here, it meant Alaric was moving fast to move the money. I grabbed a tub of dirty dishes and walked past their table, moving slowly. Alaric wants the donation papers signed by noon, Thaddeus whispered to his colleague. Once the death is finalized at the service today, the Vale Group shares transfer to the Crown Foundation. It's a clean sweep. My grip tightened on the plastic tub. The Crown Foundation was a shell company Alaric had set up years ago. It wasn't for charity, it was a laundry machine for stolen wealth. I looked toward the counter. Cassian was watching me. He was drying a glass, but his eyes weren't on the glass. They were on the men in suits. He looked back at me and gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. It was like he knew exactly what I was thinking. I waited until Drusilla went into the pantry to hide her secret stash of expensive chocolates. I slipped out the back door and ran to the alley where Ronan was waiting in a beat-up, windowless van. "Boss, you can't go there," Ronan said as I climbed in. He looked worried. "Alaric has security everywhere. If they see a beggar who looks like Sarah Vale, they'll finish what he started." I grabbed a notepad and wrote, "I'm not going as Sarah Vale, I'm going as a ghost." I reached into a bag Ronan had brought. Inside was a high-end silicone mask, a gray wig, and a heavy, shapeless black mourning dress. Within 10 minutes, I looked like an 80-year-old woman bent over with age. We drove to the Vale estate. The gates were draped in black silk. The lawn was covered in white lilies, my favorite flower. Alaric knew how to put on a show. Hundreds of people from the corporate circle were there, holding candles and looking somber. I moved through the crowd, leaning on a wooden cane. My heart hammered against my ribs when I saw him. Alaric stood on a raised platform next to a giant photo of me. He was dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief, looking like the picture of a grieving husband. Sarah was the light of my life. Alaric's voice boomed through the speakers. She built this company with love, and in her memory, I will ensure that her legacy grows even larger under the Crown name. I stood in the back, hidden behind a large stone pillar. I saw Marceline Shaw, the VP, standing right behind him. She was smiling, a tiny, wicked curve of her lips that only I could see. She was in on it. She was the one who had helped him bypass the shipping codes. As Alaric began the symbolic signing of the death certificate for the board, a sudden commotion broke out at the entrance. A fleet of black SUVs roared up the driveway, scattering the mourners. The doors opened, and 20 men in sharp black suits stepped out. They weren't Alaric's men. They wore silver pins on their lapels, the mark of the Renhold Consortium. The crowd parted as a man stepped forward. It wasn't Cassian, it was his lead assistant, John, looking powerful and intimidating. "Mr. Crown?" John shouted. his voice echoing across the lawn. "The Renhold Consortium has a message for you." Alaric stopped signing, his face turning pale. "This is a funeral. How dare you interrupt this moment of grief?" "Grief?" John smirked. "We're here because Renhold just bought the debt of the southern suburb project you just gambled on. You're over-leveraged, Alaric. By our calculations, Vale Freight Group is technically insolvent as of 10 minutes ago. We're here to discuss the foreclosure." The crowd gasped. The grieving husband was suddenly a man facing bankruptcy. I watched from behind my pillar, stunned. Cassian had done it. He hadn't just watched from the diner, he had sent his army to strike Alaric at his most public moment. Alaric's face turned a deep, angry red. "Get out. My wife's estate will cover the debts. The shares transferred to me today." "Only if she's dead, Alaric," John said coolly. "And until a body is produced or 7 years pass, Renhold is contesting the transfer of assets. We don't believe she's gone." I felt a surge of triumph. Cassian was blocking the money. He was keeping my empire safe in a legal limbo where Alaric couldn't touch it. Alaric screamed for security to remove the Renhold team. In the chaos, I slipped away, moving back toward Ronan's van. I had seen enough. Alaric was wounded, and the dead wife was the one holding the knife. When I got back to the diner, I changed back into my dirty apron just as Cassian's truck pulled in. He walked into the kitchen, looking as calm as if he'd just been out buying milk. He looked at me, and I saw a smudge of black ink on his thumb, the kind used for high-level corporate contracts. "It was a busy day in the city," he said, walking over to the sink to wash his hands. "Did anything happen here?" I picked up my notepad and wrote, "Just more dishes." He laughed softly. "Don't worry, Sarah. The world is changing. Soon the people who think they are at the top are going to realize the ground is made of glass." I realized then that we were both playing a beautiful, deadly duet. He was the hammer, and I was the scalpel. Alaric Crown thought he was burying me today, but he was actually just digging the hole he was going to fall into. I looked at the TV in the diner. The news was already showing the funeral fiasco. Alaric looked like a loser. My stock was crashing, but that was okay. I was going to buy it all back for pennies. The chaos at the funeral was the spark I needed. While Alaric was busy fighting off the lawyers from the Renhold Consortium, I was busy building a ghost that would haunt him forever. "Sarah! The grease trap is clogged again!" Drusilla screamed from the kitchen. "Don't just stand there looking at your reflection in the toaster. Fix it." I knelt on the cold, sticky floor and started working on the pipes. My hands were covered in black sludge, but my mind was miles away, looking at digital spreadsheets. I had already sent the signal to Ronan. It was time to launch Seaborn Trading Co. officially. I pulled my phone out with my clean hand and typed a message to Ronan. "Register the office in the old warehouse district. Make it look small, but move the big contracts today. Start with the Hartwell family." The Hartwells were the biggest clients Alaric had left. If I took them, he wouldn't have enough cash to pay his electricity bill, let alone his security team. "You're getting better at fixing things," a voice said. I looked up. Cassian was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He was wearing a clean white shirt, and for a second, he didn't look like a handyman at all. He looked like the most powerful man in the world. He reached down and took the wrench from my hand. "I'll finish this," he said gently. "You've done enough for one day. Why don't you go take a walk? The air is fresh after the rain." I nodded and wiped my hands. I knew what he was doing. He was giving me an excuse to leave so I could do my secret work. Did he know? I looked into his eyes, but they were like deep pools of water, calm and impossible to read. I walked down to the docks, the smell of salt and rust filling my nose. Ronan was waiting in a small, dusty office above a crane repair shop. "Boss, it's done," Ronan said, grinning. He pointed to a bank of computer monitors. "Seaborn Trading is live. I sent the offer to the Hartwells. I told them we can ship their goods for 20% less than Vale Freight because we don't have the administrative chaos Alaric is dealing with." I typed, "Did they sign?" "They're hesitating," Ronan admitted. "They're afraid of Alaric's lawyers." But then, something weird happened. An anonymous source sent them a file showing Alaric's private debts. Once they saw how broke he actually is, they realized Vale Freight might go under any minute. They're signing with us to save themselves. I knew that anonymous source was Cassian. He was clearing the path for me, even if he didn't know I was the one walking it. While we were talking, the TV in the office flashed a breaking news alert. CEO Alaric Crown seen in heated argument with VP Marceline Shaw, the reporter said. The camera showed Alaric outside a fancy restaurant, his face red with rage, shouting at Marceline. She looked terrified. The trap is working, I thought. When money disappears, criminals start blaming each other. I headed back to the diner as the sun was setting. When I walked in, the atmosphere was heavy. Drusilla was sitting at a table, crying loudly while Blythe tried to calm her down. We're ruined, Drusilla wailed. The bank called. They said our land lease is being bought out by some big group. We're going to be homeless. I froze. I looked at Cassian, who was sitting quietly in the corner. He didn't look worried, but he looked focused. Don't worry, Mom, Cassian said. I'll handle it. Handle it? You're a handyman, Drusilla snapped. You can't fight the big companies. I walked over to the counter and grabbed a piece of paper. I wrote, Who is buying the land? Blythe looked at the notice. It says the buyer is Northgate Holdings. They want to turn this whole block into a parking lot for their new mall. I knew Northgate. They were the ones Alaric was trying to impress. He must have suggested this to them to prove he still had vision. He was trying to destroy the only home I had left to crawl back into the good graces of the rich. I felt a cold rage. Alaric had tried to kill me, he had stolen my company, and now he was trying to take the roof from the man who saved my life. I went to my room and locked the door. My fingers flew across the phone screen. Sarah, Ronan, cancel the Hartwell deal for a second. I have a new priority. Who owns the majority shares in Northgate Holdings? It's a split, boss. But a 15% block just went up for sale because of the market dip. Buy it. Now, use every cent of the seaborne profit. I don't want to just be a trader anymore. I want to own the people who are trying to buy this diner. I put the phone down, my heart thumping. I was no longer playing defense. I was the one making the moves now. That night, I heard a knock on my door. It was Cassian. He didn't come in, he just spoke through the wood. Sarah, he said softly. I know you're worried about the diner, but I want you to trust me. No one is going to take this place from us. I have a plan for Northgate. I smiled to myself in the dark. That's funny, Cassian, I thought, because I have a plan for them too. The next morning, the beggar wife and the handyman husband went to work as usual, both of them secretly owning pieces of the giants who were trying to crush them. Alaric thought he was playing chess against a ghost, but he was actually playing against two grandmasters who were starting to move in sync. The day of the great land auction arrived, and the air felt like a storm was coming. Alaric had been bragging on the news that he was going to buy the entire district to build Crown Plaza. He didn't know that the land he wanted was actually a trap I had set with Ronan's help. Sarah, wear something decent for once, Drusilla yelled, throwing a plain black dress at me. Cassian is taking us to the auction. He thinks he can save the diner, but we're just going to watch him fail in front of the whole city. I want to look good for the cameras. I put on the dress. It was cheap, but I carried myself like I was wearing silk. Cassian was waiting by the truck. He looked at me and for a moment, his eyes softened. You look beautiful, Sarah. Don't worry about today. Justice has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. We drove to the Grand Hall. The room was filled with the most powerful people in the city. I saw Alaric sitting in the front row, looking like a king. Marceline was next to him, whispering in his ear. The next item is the Southgate suburban plot, the auctioneer announced. Starting bid is 50 million. Alaric raised his paddle immediately. 60 million. He wanted this land because he thought it was the key to Northgate's new project. But I knew something he didn't. The city council had secretly changed the zoning laws yesterday. That land now protected wetlands. You couldn't build a doghouse on it, let alone a mall. I leaned over and tapped Cassian's arm. I showed him a note I had written. Let him have it. It's a swamp. Cassian looked at the note, then at me. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. He didn't raise his paddle. He just sat back and watched. 80 million. Alaric shouted, looking back at the crowd to see who would challenge him. No one did. Going once? Going twice? Sold to Alaric Crown. Alaric stood up and cheered, waving to the cameras. He had just spent the last of Vale Freight's cash on a pile of mud. But the auction wasn't over. Next is the Northgate commercial block, the auctioneer said. This was the block where our diner stood. 10 million! A voice shouted from the back. It was Vesper Langley, the recruiter who had tried to hire Cassian. She was bidding for a secret client. 12 million. Drusilla gasped as Alaric raised his hand again. He wanted to crush the diner just to be spiteful. Suddenly, Cassian stood up. He didn't use a paddle. He just spoke with a voice that filled the entire room. 50 million. The room went silent. Alaric turned around, squinting at Cassian. Who are you? You look like a janitor. You don't have 50 million cents. His name is Cassian Wren, Vesper said, her voice trembling. And he's the CEO of the Wrenhold Consortium. The gasp that went through the room was like a physical wave. Drusilla fell back into her seat, her mouth hanging open. Alaric's face went from red to white. 50 million is my opening bid, Cassian said, stepping into the aisle. And I'm also announcing that Wrenhold has just acquired 51% of Northgate Holdings. The plan to build a mall on that block is cancelled. The diner stays. I sat there, my heart racing. My husband was a lion. But I wasn't done yet. I stood up and walked toward the stage. Alaric laughed when he saw me. What is this? The janitor's wife wants to say something? Security, get this beggar out of here. I didn't stop. I walked right up to the microphone. I pulled a small bottle from my pocket, the medicine Dr. Soren had given me to help my vocal cords heal. I drank it, cleared my throat, and looked Alaric right in the eyes. The only person leaving, Alaric, I said, my voice raspy but clear and loud, is you. The silence in the room was so heavy you could hear a pin drop. Alaric froze. He knew that voice. He knew those eyes. Sarah, he whispered, his hands shaking. You're dead. I saw you fall. I don't fall easily, I said, a cold smile on my face. But your stock certainly does. Check your phone, Alaric. Seaborn Trading just bought your remaining debt. I own your house, I own your car. And as of right now, I own your freedom. The doors to the hall burst open. Police officers walked in, led by Ronan. Alaric Crown, you are under arrest for attempted murder and corporate fraud, the lead officer said. As they led a screaming, crying Alaric away in handcuffs, Cassian walked up to the stage. He stood next to me and took my hand. You have a very beautiful voice, Sarah Vale, he whispered. I looked at him, finally seeing the man behind the mask. And you make a very good handyman, Cassian Wren. The beggar and the janitor stood together at the front of the room, while the rest of the world realized that the most dangerous people are the ones you think have nothing left to lose. The heavy oak doors of the Vale Freight Group headquarters swung open. I didn't crawl in this time, I marched. I wore a tailored suit the color of midnight, and my heels clicked against the marble floor like a ticking clock. Behind me walked Ronan and a team of auditors. The lobby went silent. Employees who had been whispering about Alaric's arrest froze in their tracks. I saw Assistant John standing near the elevators, his jaw dropping so low it looked painful. Boss, he stammered. We heard the news from the auction. We thought it was a prank. Do I look like a prank, John? My voice was back, stronger and sharper than ever. Assemble the board in 10 minutes and call security. I have some trash to take out. I headed straight for the top floor. When I reached my old office, I found Marceline Shaw sitting in my chair. She was frantically stuffing documents into a shredder. She looked up, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. Sarah, thank goodness you're okay. She lied, her voice shaking. Alaric forced me to help him. I was trying to save the company for you. Get out of my chair, Marceline, I said, my voice cold as ice. You don't understand. I understand that you authorized the shipping delays that nearly cost us the Northgate deal, I interrupted, stepping closer. I understand that you took a $5 million bribe from Alaric to forge my signature on the share transfer. And I understand that the police are waiting downstairs to talk to you about being an accessory to attempted murder. Marceline collapsed back into the chair, sobbing. 2 security guards stepped in and escorted her out. I didn't feel pity. I felt peace. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking for a place to hide. I was looking at my kingdom. The board meeting was a slaughter. The directors who had turned their backs on me tried to apologize, but I didn't want apologies. I wanted results. You all thought I was dead, so you let a thief run the company into the ground, I told them, slamming a file onto the long mahogany table. As of this morning, Seabourn Trading Co. is merging with Vale Freight Group. We are taking back the Hartwell contract, and we are suing the Crown Estate for every penny Alaric stole. Just as the meeting ended, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Cassian. Cassian, meet me at the diner. There's someone who wants to see you. I hurried back to the small greasy building that had been my sanctuary. When I walked in, the grandmother look was gone, and the billionaire was back. Drusilla was sitting at a booth, looking terrified. When she saw me, she jumped up. Sarah? Oh, beautiful Sarah, she squealed, trying to hug me. I always knew you were special. I told everyone you were like a daughter to me. I gently pushed her away. Drusilla, you told everyone I had fleas. But don't worry, I'm not going to kick you out. I've bought the land and I'm giving the diner to Blythe. You can stay, but you're going to work the dish pit for a change. Drusilla's face fell, but she didn't dare argue. I walked to the back room, the one where I had slept on a wooden cot. Cassian was there, but he wasn't alone. A man was sitting in a wheelchair, looking weak but happy. Dad, Cassian said, gesturing to the man. This is Sarah. My wife. It was Gideon Renford. He had finally woken up. I heard what you did, Gideon rasped, reaching out a hand. You saved this family while you were fighting your own war. Thank you, Sarah. I took his hand, my eyes welling with tears. In my world of billions, no one ever said thank you for anything but a profit. Cassian walked me outside to the alleyway. The fancy cars were gone. It was just us. So, Cassian said, leaning against his old truck. The Queen has her throne back. What happens now? Do we sign the divorce papers? I looked at the simple wedding band still on my finger. Then I looked at the man who had seen me as a human being when the rest of the world saw a beggar. The contract said it was to keep me safe, I said softly. But I think I'm safer with you than I am in a fortress. Cassian smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring that glowed with a light I recognized. A blue diamond, the rarest in the world. I think the CEO of Renhold should give his wife a better ring than a pawn shop special, he whispered. I laughed, the sound bright and clear. I think the CEO of Vale Freight might just accept. But our moment was interrupted by a loud, sudden scream from the diner. We ran inside to find Dr. Soren standing there, holding a clipboard and looking shocked. Sarah, Cassian, the doctor shouted. I just got the lab results back from Sarah's last checkup after the recovery. Is she sick? Cassian asked, his face turning pale with worry. No, Dr. Soren said, a huge grin breaking across his face. She's pregnant. It's been a month. I froze, my hand going to my stomach. A month. That meant the new life began right when I thought my old life was over. Cassian pulled me into his arms, spinning me around. We weren't just two CEOs anymore. We were a family, and Alaric Crown was rotting in a cell, knowing he had lost not just the money, but the future. The news of my pregnancy felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was building. As I stood in the middle of the crowded diner, surrounded by the smell of fries and the sound of my own heartbeat, I realized that Alaric hadn't just failed to kill me, he had failed to stop my future. A month? Cassian whispered, his hands still resting on my waist. His eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and pure, unshielded joy. Sarah, we're gonna have a baby. I nodded, unable to stop the tears from flowing. A new beginning, Cassian, a real one. But before we could settle into our happiness, there was one last bit of business to handle. The Queen and the King had to clean up the battlefield. 2 days later, the city's largest courthouse was surrounded by news trucks. Alaric Crown was being brought in for his final hearing. I arrived in a motorcade of black SUVs, but this time, the lead car was mine, and the second car belonged to the Renhold Consortium. Cassian and I walked up the courthouse steps together, our fingers locked tight. Inside the courtroom, Alaric looked pathetic. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and the arrogance was gone. When he saw me walk in, healthy, glowing, and standing next to the man who had dismantled his life, he let out a low, broken moan. I have a statement, I said, standing before the judge. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice of a woman who had survived the fall. Alaric Crown didn't just try to kill me, I told the court. He tried to kill the spirit of Val Freight Group. He used my name to hurt innocent people and steal from the city. I am asking the court to not only sentence him to life in prison, but to strip him of every single cent he has. I want it all returned to a charity fund for homeless women and victims of domestic violence. The judge nodded. So ordered. As the guards began to lead Alaric away, he suddenly lunged toward the railing, screaming at me. "You'll never be happy, Sarah. You're a cold, heartless boss. You're just like me." I stopped and looked him right in the eye. "No, Alaric. You pushed me off a roof to be alone at the top. I climbed back up so I could bring everyone else with me. That's the difference." We walked out of the courthouse to a sea of flashing cameras. I didn't hide my face this time. I wanted the world to see that Sarah Vale was back, and she wasn't alone. That evening, Cassian and I sat on the roof of the Vale Group headquarters, the very same roof where Alaric had pushed me. But the glass was fixed, the lights were bright, and the atmosphere was peaceful. "I have a surprise," Cassian said, handing me a document. I opened it. It was a merger agreement. Renvale International. "We don't have to fight for the same clients anymore," he said with a grin. "Together, we control 90% of the trade in the country. We can use the profits to build schools, hospitals, and better housing for people like those we met at the diner." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Renvale? I like the sound of that." "And what about the diner?" I asked. "Blythe is running it now," Cassian laughed. "And believe it or not, Drusilla is actually the best dishwasher they've ever had. She's too scared of you to slack off." We looked out over the city. Below us, the ships moved across the dark water, their lights twinkling like diamonds. I thought about the girl in the tattered coat who had stood in the rain just months ago. She was gone, replaced by a woman who knew that true power wasn't in a bank account. It was in the people who stayed by your side when you had nothing. I placed my hand over my stomach and then reached for Cassian's hand. "The freight is moving, the empire is safe, and the baby is growing," I whispered. "I think we finally won." "No," Cassian said, turning to kiss my forehead. "I think we just started." The beggar had reclaimed her throne, the handyman had revealed his crown, and together they were building a world where no one would ever have to be a ghost again.